Hi, today I will be discussing with you the consequence of biodiversity change. We need to understand about the consequence of biodiversity change, what the things happen in the past and what is happening in the present. The number of species and the diversity of species that is being continuously increasing, day by day it is increasing, year after year, period after year period it is increasing. But the point is whether the increase in the species or the diversity, is it steady or not? No, it is not steady. For a certain period of time the speciation process was much better, but at certain time it is not, wherein certain changes has taken place, certain natural or some other features has taken place that has resulted in extinction of species. So this is a very important thing to understand, that how this extinction is taking place, how speciation is taking place. So both this speciation and extinction is a natural process. And when you look at the past geological periods, if you look at it, there are exactly 5 species extinction has taken place in the period. For example, the Ordovician, Devonian, Permian, Triassic and Cretaceous. These are the 5 major periods where mass extinction has taken place. And if you understand the reasons can be volcanic eruption, it can be an earthquake, it can be seismic activity, it can be many other reasons, even the climate change also. So these are the reasons, because of that thing extinction has taken place in the past. But now if you look at it, the present stage, what is happening? So there, if you look at the present stage, it is kind of the extinction is taking place. That extinction we call it as 6th mass extinction. And this extinction, if you look at it, there are 2 important things. One is the reason for extinction is the human beings, and the second important character or the feature of the extinction is the extinction rate. The extinction rate is 100 to 1000 times more than the background extinction. So the point I wanted to say is that these 2 important features are very important for us to understand the present phenomenon of extinction. I was talking just about the extinction rate and also the extinction that has taken place in the past. And if you look at carefully the past 5 extinctions, the one important extinction that has taken place in the Permian period is very important thing, wherein a drastic change has taken place, where 75% of land animals was extinct. And as far as the aquatic environment is concerned, more than 90% of the aquatic species was extinct. So this Permian period, it's very critical as far as the extinction is concerned. And if you see the late Pleistocene period, certain biotic communities were severely stressed, and they were so much stressed, and that led to, or in other words, they were vulnerable to extinction. And there was a progressive decline of species over the last 30,000 years. Large mammals from Australia, North and South America were eliminated. And why? These all the things happened in the past 30,000 years, wherein 74 to 86% of megafauna, that is the animal, the weight of the animal is more than 44 kg, and they are extinct. And the prime reason is the human action. What are the actions? If you see, hunting, even the change in the weather or the climate or deforestation. So these are all the factors that was responsible for this event, for this stress to the biotic communities. And this is a very important thing that is leading to the present day mass extinction, that is 6th mass extinction. So the human beings are responsible for this event, that is what currently taking place. And in that context, this topic, that is the consequence of biodiversity change, is important. We can understand that how biodiversity change can impact the human beings, how biodiversity change can impact on other living organisms. So this is a very key important feature that we need to understand. So at this stage, if you look at it, is that more than 16,000 species are threatened globally. So you look at the statistics, more than 16,000 species are threatened globally. It's a very important statistics. We can understand that how important the threats to biodiversity are. So I was just talking about it. I talked about the rate or the current state of extinction and vis-a-vis the today's biodiversity. What is the special features of today's biodiversity? Because there is a difference. After every extinction there was a difference. The characteristics of biodiversity is different. And today's biodiversity, if you look at it, today's biodiversity are impoverished. The population, it's depleted of subspecies and population. And what I want to say is that they are kind of, it's very difficult for them to survive, or in other words they are highly vulnerable. So the kind of variation, kind of adaptability, these features they are lacking. So what I want to say is that the number of species which is present now, they are highly vulnerable for further extinctions, because the adaptability, ecological adaptability is very, very less. The kind of variability, genetic variability, that is also less. The genetic variability is an essential factor. Why? For the point of natural evolution to take place, it is important. For the point of plant breeding, it is important. For the point of every activity, evolutionary activity, this particular genetic variation is important, and thus genetic variation is at loss in the present biodiversity. We need to understand that particular thing. So this particular biodiversity loss, how that will be impacting the evolution, that is a foremost important thing. Speciation is very important thing. This is the formation of new species is important thing. Along with that, we need to understand that the species will be adapting itself to the new environment. So both simultaneously will responsible for speciation process. Either the species has to be formed, or the present species should be adapted to the changing environmental conditions. So this biodiversity loss, that is going to impact the processes of evolution. That is a very important thing, because the loss of biodiversity is going to disrupt the processes of evolution. And the kind of population, the kind of resource that we are having it now, that we have to take into account, that is called as resource base. So over the resource base only the evolutionary process will be taking place. What are the evolutionary processes? Just now I was talking about the evolutionary process are the natural processes. This process, natural process of evolution, will be acting on the resource, and that resource what we are having, that is the today's biodiversity, is impoverished. So resource base is critically endangered, it is reduced. So in that case, how the evolution will be? So the evolution itself, it's very, very difficult. So we need to preserve the resources whatever we are having it, and we need to conserve it. Then only the evolutionary process itself, by itself, we can preserve it. And that is very, very essential, because new species has to be evolved, and what that is possible by conserving the resource base. The second important factor is the recovery period. When I say recovery period, because for after every extinction there is certain time period, certain period will be there, that is called recovery period, during which the species will be regenerating itself. And this recovery period is very, very essential for us to understand further the consequence of biodiversity change. So I was talking about the Permian period, that is a Permian extinction, and that has taken place in the last 250 million years ago. This Permian period extinction has taken place. For the species to recover after the Permian extinction, the period required, it was almost 50 million years that was required. That is called recovery period. After Cretaceous period, Cretaceous extinction, the recovery period was only 5 million years. So now if you see the present day in extinction, it required more than 5 million years. So the recovery period is very, very important thing, and this recovery period, it is protracted due to certain reasons. And the present day, if you look at it, the recovery period is protracted due to loss of key environment. What is that key environment? So when I am talking about the key environment, I am talking about the tropical environment. I am talking about the tropical environment, or resources present in the tropical environment. I am talking about the coral reefs. I am talking about the rich aquatic environment. I am talking about the tropical rainforest. I am talking about the grasslands or whatnot, everything that is present in the tropical environment. Because this tropical environment is rich in resources, it is rich in the suitable climatic condition, it is rich in the suitable abiotic condition, even the soil. So everything is providing a platform for the tropical species to survive, and it is providing a platform for speciation. So this is a very, very important thing. That is why I said this environment, the tropical environment, is the key environment from the point of view of speciation. So in this region, the speciation process, or number of species or species diversity, is very, very high due to conditions like climate, due to conditions like soil. These all the factors are responsible for this rich species diversity in this particular region. But the question is, this tropical environment is endangered. There is you will find that tropical forest is declining, deforestation is taking place in the Amazon forest, and so on and so forth, it is taking place. So what I want to say is, this tropical environment is endangered. Even the coral reefs, it is endangered because of the human action, because of the change in the climate. So this tropical environment, when it is affected, what will happen? Further speciation process will be influenced. So we need to take care of this particular thing, tropical environment. So when you look at the past in the tropical environment, this region acts like a powerhouse of speciation. So many species evolved from this particular region, tropical environment. The rate of evolutionary diversification, that is also very high in tropical environment. But as I told you just now, in the present stage, this key environment, we are losing it very fast due to human action, and this key environment has to be conserved. Only then the further speciation process will be enhanced. So what is left for future evolution? What is left? We need to understand, we need to take the inventory of it. So then only we can understand how important the process is, how important the conservation is. So when you see, the current mass extinction applies most of the categories of species. When I say this particular point is a key point, because the current mass extinction is going to affect most of the species. When you look at the past extinction, some species escaped, but in this case, in the current mass extinction, most of the species will be affected severely. In that case, what I want to say is that the resource basis will be very critical. Further selection process will be also affecting. So we need to understand this particular thing, and that is the reason why I was saying that the key environment is a very critical component for our understanding of biodiversity change. We need to take a very important pledge, that is, the evolutionary process must be preserved. How we will be preserving? We will be taking the stock of the genetic stock of the population. We will be understanding the critical resources, and that critical resources has to be safeguarded from further attack, for further threats from human beings. And along with the evolution process, one important process we need to understand, that is domestication. Domestication simply means bringing a wild species under human management, and this domestication is a very important thing. For example, in case of an agricultural activity, we have few crops, more than 12 crops we are currently using to a larger extent. So this, because of domestication, we are thriving, human beings are existing. So we have domesticated to meet our needs, food needs, clothing needs, or shelter needs. We have domesticated certain crop plants, certain animal species, and that is a very important thing for our existence. So I'll take an example that how this domestication is important from the point of view of biodiversity change. So I'll take the example of an aquatic biodiversity. See, this aquatic biodiversity has to be conserved. It's a very essential feature. So why? Because majority of genetic resources that we are using from the marine environment as a food is still coming from wild environment. It indicates what? It indicates low domestication. So the point I wanted to stress here is that the fish resources, whatever we are taking from the wild environment. So there is less of domestication. So if we lose the genetic resources, the wild genetic resources, what will happen? So we will be at loss. Our valuable resources will be at loss, aquatic resources will be lost, because we are not yet domesticated. So the domestication process will be affected. So the point is, the biodiversity has to be conserved, because from the point of domestication it is to be conserved, and from the point of view of kind of co-adaptation, co-evolution, this biodiversity has to be conserved, because along with the process of domestication, many other things are happening. Domestication is a very important process that is to be understood from the point of genetics, from the point of cytogenetics, from the point of view of plant breeding, from the point of view of the threats to genetic resources. So it's a very big thing as far as domestication is concerned. So that domestication is questioned because of the biodiversity change. And we need to understand that from the point of view of biodiversity and the ecosystem. When I say ecosystem is a very important thing that symbolizes what? It symbolizes the interaction between the physical environment and the biological environment, and this ecosystem is having a very key role to play as far as the biodiversity management is concerned, because this ecosystem provides many services. Can be provisional services, can be regulating services, can be cultural services. So it provides a lot of services to the human beings, it provides a lot of services to other living organisms. The services can be either tangible or intangible. So there are many services to mention, but the point I wanted to say is that the ecosystem provides services due to certain functions, that is called ecosystem functions. That ecosystem functions can be threatened because of the change in the biodiversity. The biodiversity loss can lead to reduced ecosystem functioning. If that is what it is taking place, it is happening, then what will happen? The services whatever we are getting from the ecosystem, that will be reduced drastically. And if the services that we are getting from the ecosystem, if it is reduced, what will happen to the living organisms? Their existence, their survival, it will be dangerous, it's very risky. So the point I want to say is that biodiversity change will have a deep impact on the ecosystem function and ecosystem service provisions. Just now I was talking about it. We can understand very well that why this biodiversity is going to affect the ecosystem functioning. What are the reasons? What are the relationships? So for that to understand, there are two mechanisms that biodiversity can influence the ecosystem functioning. One is niche complementarity. See, each and every species has a role to play. In an ecosystem, each and every species is having a role to play. Each species will be taking up the resources. If we have more of the species, what will happen to the resources? There will be possibility of cycling of nutrients. There will be efficient utilization of resources. So the niche complementarity is a very, very important function in an ecosystem, and that is made possible by biodiversity. And second important thing is the sampling effect or selection mechanism. In a biodiverse ecosystem, there will be certain species, those species are very dominant, they will be very highly productive, and that highly productive species will be existing in highly biodiverse region, ecosystem rich in biodiversity. Certain species will be there, they will be highly productive. So those species are very, very essential. So for the existence of those species, for the survival of those species, biodiversity is important. So these are the two important mechanisms. Niche complementarity and selection mechanism or sampling effect is very, very important mechanism through which the biodiversity can influence the ecosystem. For instance, if there is a reduction in biodiversity, that could lead to decrease in the niche complementarity, and there will be a likelihood of high functioning species also to be lost. So we need to take into account that particular phenomenon of sampling effect or niche complementarity. I was just talking about that how the biodiversity is related with the ecosystem. I can relate this particular point from ecosystem integrity, from ecosystem stability. So when I say ecosystem integrity, integrity is a very, very important phenomenon. Ecosystem integrity is a very, very important phenomenon because the ecosystem has to be intact. Only when there is ecosystem is intact, then only that will lead to ecosystem stability. When I say ecosystem stability, that ecosystem stability means what? It means that the ecosystem, because whatever it happens, whatever the disturbance, whatever the stress, the ecosystem will be stable. And this stability of ecosystem is because of two phenomena. One is the resistance and the other one is the resilience. Because the ecosystem stability is made possible by resistance. There are certain species in the ecosystem that will help, that will provide the resistance for the change, that will provide the resistance against the stresses. So resistance is an important thing. The other phenomenon is resilience. The ecosystem resilience is a very, very important factor. So certain species that are there in that particular ecosystem, they have the power to resilient, and that is a key thing. Both the resilience and resistance is a key important thing in ecosystem stability, and that ecosystem stability is made possible by greater biodiversity. I will give an example for how the biodiversity loss at the ecosystem level, what kind of impact it can be. So there is a great forest that is called a legendary forest, in fact, Monteverde Cloud Forest in the Costa Rica. In this particular forest that is called Monteverde Cloud Forest, this forest takes up the moisture from the condensation of the clouds. So it is a very, very legendary, it is a very, very important thing. So what happened? Because of the climate change, the cloud formation that has extended to a larger altitude, and because of that thing there was a lot of changes in the Monteverde forest. Even the ecosystem that has been severely affected, and that led to what? Because of the change in the forest environment, forest ecosystem, that has affected severely other species, because each and every species are interrelated. See how if one is affected, one component of an ecosystem is affected, that will affect other species. So this kind of interaction we have to take into account. We can understand much better, because these are the very important thing we need to take into account categorically for understanding how the biodiversity change will affect other parts of the ecosystem. There are many examples, for example the coral reefs also, because there is a symbiotic relationship that is existing between an algae and the coral. So this symbiotic relationship also will be affected due to a climate change or due to sedimentation or due to any other phenomenon, and because of that thing what happened, the relationship, symbiotic relationship, that will be affected, and the zooxanthellae that will be thrown out, and that will lead to a condition called coral bleaching, and because of this coral bleaching, existence of other fish or other organisms that is in the coral environment, that also will be affected. So my point is that biodiversity loss at ecosystem level is a very critical thing. We need to understand. If we can give an example that how biodiversity loss, for example a loss of a keystone species, how that will lead to a cascade effect, extinction cascade. So there are many examples are possible. The genetic variation that is existing in the biodiversity has to be taken care of, because this genetic variation at all levels aid in adaptation to the changing environments. So this I will take an example of an agro ecosystem or an agro biodiversity, because agro biodiversity provides immense benefit to the mankind and for the preservation of the environment, because this agro biodiversity is a repository of gene and it will provide the genes for the adaptability. The crops will be adapted to the extreme environmental conditions also, and also very importantly this agro biodiversity is important for the development of new crop species, for the best possible things are there, because for the medicinal purposes or industrial purposes or for other purposes new crops are in dire need for because meeting the needs of the human beings. And as far as the use of biodiversity, agro biodiversity is concerned, how important in the agro ecosystem, the best example is in the traditional agro ecosystem, wherein there are so many species that are intermingled, how efficiently they are using the resources, how effectively the biogeochemical cycling is taking place in that particular agro ecosystems, and the services the plant genetic resources they are providing, it is immense, whether in the crop environment or even the human economies and the sustenance of it and whatnot, everything there, the services are very wide as far as the plant genetic resources are concerned. Mainly what I want to say is that kind of the land races, they are the repository of genes, because they have the genes for which can provide resistance against the disease causing organisms, against the pest, and also it is having the genes for providing the tolerance to the abiotic stresses, and everything is possible as far as the for example yield maximization also. When I say yield maximization, because the genes for yield increase that is existing in the biodiverse regions, that is existing in the agro biodiversity, and this is a very important thing as far as the stress breeding is concerned or research on root architecture. Now the point is this biodiversity, I said that it's very important thing, and if it is at loss, what will happen? The production of food, fiber, fuel, that will be at risk, and it will be very risky, because if we lose it, the food production will be affected, and if we lose it, the agro ecosystem services that this agro biodiversity is providing, that will be affected. Think about a plant that has been pollinated by a specific insect population or a specific animal. So if that species, the insect pollinator, if it is affected, if it is vanished, if it is extinct, what will happen to the pollination? So what I want to say is that this agro ecosystem services we cannot have it if we lose the agro biodiversity. So this particular point we need to understand that how the rural livelihood security, how food security, everything is important, how it is connected to the agro biodiversity. So if we lose agro biodiversity, these securities that also will be endangered. And as far as agro biodiversity is concerned, I can say many examples. The first example is allopolyploids. Think about the hexaploid wheat that is called allopolyploids. Brassica, think about the huge triangle. So this allopolyploids was possible because of this agro biodiversity. I was talking about the pollinating insects. The services of pollinating insects and animals, it's a big industry, it is providing a lot of benefits to the cross-pollinated crops. 35% of world's crop production is dependent on this cross-pollinated crops. So to sum it up, I wanted to say is that this agro biodiversity, or for that matter biodiversity, is very essential component, essential definitely from the point of view of food security, for achieving food security, for achieving nutritional security and livelihood security is very important thing, and for adapting to the changing environment, this biodiversity is a key component, and this biodiversity forms a foundation for scientific plant breeding. And this I was just mentioning about the evolutionary process, because whatever the biodiversity we are having it, we need to conserve it, we need to put all the measures possible, so then only the evolutionary process that will be preserved. Only when our evolutionary process is preserved, new species will be evolved, and that is a very important thing, because evolution is a necessary process, it has to take place. And lastly, if you see, the ecological and socio-economic consequences of biodiversity change should be reduced to preserve plausible options for future solutions to climate change. To put it other way, that this era what we are standing, it is a very, very important thing from the point of view of climate change, from the point of view of the lot of changes that is taking place in the environment, that's called global environmental change. So to manage to sustain ourselves, to stay in this particular environment, we need to have certain measures, and that measures, it means for health wise we need, because definitely, because this biodiversity is a very, very key important thing. For example, this loss of biodiversity can cause harm to the human health also. The best example is the West Nile virus, and this West Nile virus, the kind of devastation that has caused, that is somewhere related to the loss of biodiversity. I'll explain to you. West Nile virus, the host is the birds, and the bird population, the bird diversity, if it is reducing, what will happen? The West Nile virus encephalitis, that disease has occurred much more. So the point I want to say is that not only agriculture, even the human health, even for example the carbon sequestration, the best example, because carbon sequestration is a very, very important thing, because for example the trees are the best carbon sequesters. So if you have a tree, a long term, if you look at it, the tree is slowly growing, fine, it's very good. For a long term it will start sequestering the carbon. So if that particular tree species is affected, or it is removed because of certain fungal species, or because of the human action, what will happen? The carbon sequestration potential of the trees, we are losing it. So the point I wanted to stress here is that we need to understand the consequences of biodiversity change. Once we have understood, that's what we have understood now, and we need to take the measures, whether it is a conservation measure, in situ or ex situ conservation, we need to take the conservation measures, and then we have to proceed further. Globally we need to have certain acts, and definitely all the possible things in the world over, if you see, the Committee of Nations should come forward and sit properly and understand and come with a wonderful law of conserving the biodiversity. Thank you.